September 12th, 1958. Late Friday night on Lenox Avenue. Harlem is alive in that specific way it only gets when the sun's been down for hours and nobody wants to go home. Neon spills onto the sidewalk. Cabs hiss by. People laugh too loud, like the night is a shield. Inside the Lenox lounge, the air is thick with smoke and perfume and heat. A jazz band is mid-set, horns cutting through the room like a warning you don't recognize yet. Glasses clink. Low voices trade secrets over cognac. And in the corner, under the dim glow, Bumpy Johnson sits like he owns the oxygen. Calm, still, not hiding, not rushed, just watching. Because the room isn't just a club tonight. It's a setup. The kind you don't notice until it's already closing around your neck. According to later accounts and memoirs, this was the night someone tried to take Harlem's king off the board. Not with a street shooter, not with a random drive-by. With something colder, a betrayal close enough to breathe the same air. Big Sam is there too. 6 foot something, built like a door that never opens unless Bumpy says so. For years, Sam has been the shadow that keeps danger at a distance. Tonight, he moves like he's carrying a storm under his jacket. And that's the detail. The one thing Bumpy catches before anyone else does, Sam's hand. Shaking, just a little. Not from alcohol, not from the music, from the weight of a decision he can't take back. Bumpy doesn't turn. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't even reach for his untouched glass. He just sits there like a man who already knows how the next minute ends. Sam positions himself near the bar, watching, waiting. Then he starts walking. Through the crowd, through the smoke, straight toward the back of Bumpy Johnson's head. The band hits a note and holds it a half second too long. Sam closes the distance. 6 feet, 4, 2, his hand slides inside his jacket. He brings the gun up, he aims, he pulls the trigger, and we cut to 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks earlier. To understand what almost happened in that club, you have to understand what Bumpy Johnson was in Harlem in the late 1950s. Because he wasn't just another gangster with a gun and a crew. He was a system. Back then, Harlem ran on numbers. Not Wall Street numbers. Harlem numbers. Nickels and dimes turned into rent money, grocery money, funeral money. It was a quiet economy built by people who didn't have banks that treated them like humans. And everybody wanted a piece of it. The cops wanted their cut. Politicians wanted their favors. And downtown, the Italian families wanted control. Because once you control the numbers, you don't just control money. You control who eats, who stays housed, who gets protected. And protection was the real currency. Harlem was under pressure from every side. Street crews on one corner, police harassment on the next, and outside power creeping in like a shadow that never left. In the middle of all that sat Bumpy Johnson, feared, respected, and in a way that made him more dangerous than any trigger man. Understood. They called him the Professor, not because he played nice, because he played smart. Bumpy reads people the way other men read newspapers. He loved chess, not as a hobby, as a habit, as a way of thinking, because in chess, you don't win by being the loudest. You win by seeing what's coming before it arrives. And Bumpy didn't just survive Harlem. He read it. He didn't guess. He counted moves. That's what made him so hard to kill. You could threaten him, and he'd already made plans for your fear. You could bribe people around him, and he'd already priced their weakness. You could send muscle, and he'd send it back, limping. And the Italian families, they had a complicated relationship with him. They tolerated him when it profited them, because Bumpy kept Harlem running. He kept money flowing. He kept chaos contained. A man like that is useful, until he starts acting like he owns what he's managing. And Bumpy had a way of doing that. He didn't like being anybody's employee. He didn't like Harlem being treated like a vending machine you could shake until money fell out. For years, there had been an uneasy balance, a quiet understanding. But then the balance shifted. Frank Costello, An old school power who believed in stability was pushed out of the picture. And when Costello's influence faded, the temperature changed. The new leadership didn't want a partner in Harlem. They wanted a puppet, someone who would bow, someone who would pay. And Bumpy Johnson was a lot of things, but he was not built for bowing. So the family started thinking like hunters, not about how to fight him, about how to get close enough to finish him. And that meant one thing. You don't hit Bumpy from the outside, you hit him from the inside. Because Harlem wasn't just a neighborhood. To the Italian mafia, it was a pipeline. A river of cash moving every day through numbers, gambling, protection, and street-level businesses that never showed up on paper. And the problem with a pipeline is simple. If you don't control the valve, you don't control the flow. For years, Bumpy was the valve. A man downtown could live with that, as long as the money kept coming and the streets stayed quiet. Because Bumpy was useful. He kept Harlem organized. He kept outsiders from turning the place into a war zone. He made sure the machine ran. But usefulness has an expiration date. The moment Bumpy started acting like Harlem was his, not managed, not borrowed, not supervised, the math changed. He wasn't a partner anymore. He was a liability. And the families didn't like liabilities. They liked certainty. They liked predictable men. They liked bosses who could be squeezed. So the decision formed the way these decisions always form. Not as one loud declaration. As a slow, cold agreement in rooms where the air is always smoky and nobody ever sits with their back to the door. Folded newspapers. Quiet voices. A glass set down too gently. A name said once, then not repeated. Because in those circles, you don't talk about problems. You talk about solutions. And the solution was clear. You can't take Bumpy from the outside. Not in Harlem. Not with random shooters. Not with strangers. Because Harlem sees strangers. Harlem warns Bumpy. Harlem protects its own. So if you can't reach him from the street, you reach him through the one place even kings forget to guard. Trust. The inside. The people who stand close enough to touch him, close enough to breathe the same air, close enough to put a barrel behind his head in a crowded club, and have nobody question why they're there. And that's where Big Sam comes in. Because Big Sam isn't just some guy in the background. He's the wall. He's the reason men think twice before they reach. He's the shadow that moves first. The hand that checks the door, the eyes that scan the room while Bumpy talks business like nothing in the world can touch him. For years, Sam's presence was so constant, it stopped feeling like security. It felt like gravity. If Bumpy Johnson was in a room, Big Sam was close enough that nobody questioned it. Close enough to pour a drink. Close enough to lean in. Close enough to stand behind him in a crowded Harlem club and have it look completely normal. And that's exactly why the mob chose him. Because you can't buy your way into Bumpy's circle with cash. You buy your way in with time, with loyalty, with the kind of closeness that makes people stop watching. According to later accounts and memoir retellings, the offer wasn't subtle. It wasn't a polite conversation. It was a number. A figure big enough to make a man forget who he used to be. $50,000. In the 1950s, that wasn't just money. That was a new life. A clean slate. A way out. And the people making the offer knew exactly what they were doing. Because the offer isn't just money. It's leverage. It's pressure wrapped in paper. It's a hand around your throat disguised as a handshake. Do this, and your problems disappear. Don't do it, and you keep drowning. And here's the part that makes it even colder. The mob didn't just see Sam as the key to killing Bumpy. They saw him as a loose end, because once a man proves he can betray his own boss, he can betray anyone. And in that world, traitors don't retire. They get erased. So even if Big Sam pulled it off, even if the shot landed, there's a strong chance he was never meant to enjoy that money anyway. He was meant to deliver Harlem's king, and then vanish right behind him. But Big Sam didn't know that. Or maybe he did, deep down. And he took the deal anyway. Because desperation doesn't care about tomorrow. It only cares about what hurts today. Retellings describe it like this. Big Sam didn't wake up one day and decide to become a traitor. He got cornered. Not by Bumpy. By life. Bills that don't care who you work for. A sick child coughing through the night. A hospital that takes your money and still looks at you like you're already too late. In some versions of the story, Sam's youngest daughter is fighting tuberculosis. 6 months of treatments. 6 months of receipts stacking up like bricks. And Sam is a big man, strong enough to break another man in half, but not strong enough to make medicine cheaper. He asks Bumpy for help. Bumpy gives him something, but it's not enough. It's never enough. So when the mob puts $50,000 in front of him, it doesn't feel like greed. It feels like oxygen. And that's where the war starts. Because loyalty is a beautiful thing, until it's standing next to your child's bed, listening to them struggle to breathe. Sam isn't choosing between right and wrong. He's choosing between two kinds of death. The slow one at home, or the fast one in a club. And in the dark, when he's alone, that choice starts to make sense. Because the trap isn't the club. The trap is the choice. Bumpy Johnson didn't stay alive that long by trusting his luck. He stayed alive by trusting information. In Harlem, information moved faster than bullets. And Bumpy had a network that didn't look like a network. Not men in suits, not flashy enforcers. Everyday people. Bartenders who heard what men confessed after their third drink. Cab drivers who picked up the same faces night after night. Shoeshine boys who watched who went in and out of back doors. Janitors who saw which offices got visited after hours. People nobody important noticed, which is exactly why they were perfect. That was Bumpy's edge. Not just muscle, not just fear, a psychological advantage. He made sure the streets talked to him before they talked to anyone else. And he understood something most bosses didn't. You don't always win by reacting. You win by controlling what other people think you know. Bumpy used calm like a weapon. He'd smile when he should have raged. He'd sit in public when he should have hidden. He'd let rumors spread, sometimes true, sometimes planted just to see who repeated them and how fast. He didn't panic. He planned. And in the versions of this story that survived through memoirs and street retellings, the warning came in small. Not a dramatic phone call. Not an official report. Just a detail. A black Cadillac outside Sam's place. A man nobody knew sitting in the back seat too long. A license plate scribbled on a scrap of paper. A name whispered once. And when that scrap of paper reached Bumpy, he didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He didn't confront Sam. Because confronting a man too early gives him room to lie. So Bumpy did what he always did. He waited. And he watched. Because if the mob was building a trap, Bumpy was already measuring the room. And here's where the story turns into something that feels almost impossible. Because depending on who tells it and how close they were to the streets, there isn't just one version of what happened next. There are a few, and that alone tells you something. When an underworld story survives long enough to be repeated, it doesn't survive because it's tidy. It survives because the feeling is true. Some accounts say the gun jammed. A simple mechanical failure at the exact worst moment. A bad round. A dirty chamber. A weapon that had worked 1,000 times suddenly deciding it wouldn't work one more. Other retellings say it wasn't a jam. It was a misfire. A click where there should have been thunder. Silence where there should have been death. And then there's the version whispered with a different tone. The one people tell when they want to remind you what Bumpy Johnson really was. That Bumpy suspected something. That he'd noticed the changes in Sam before anyone else did. The pauses. The shaking hand. The way a loyal man starts to look like he's somewhere else, even when he's standing right next to you. So Bumpy did what Bumpy always did. He didn't accuse. He didn't explode. He didn't make a scene. He set watchers in his own shadow. Quietly. 2 men in the room who aren't there for jazz. A bartender who keeps his eyes off the stage and on the exits. A couple of faces in the crowd whose only job is to read Sam's body language like it's a confession. because Bumpy understood something the mob didn't. If you stop the hit before it happens, you stop one bullet, but you don't stop the war. You don't expose the snake. You just teach it to hide better. So Bumpy let the plan breathe. He let the trap set itself, because the real counterplay wasn't a faster gun. It was making the traitor show his hand in public, making the betrayal undeniable. And that's why he stays calm in that club. That's why he doesn't reach for his drink. That's why he doesn't turn around until the moment is complete. Now Bumpy waits, because if he moves too early, the snake slips away, back in the Lenox Lounge. Friday night in Harlem doesn't just mean music. It means business. The club is packed shoulder to shoulder, like the walls are breathing. Musicians on the bandstand. Hustlers at the bar. Businessmen in tailored suits pretending they're only here for the jazz. Politicians smiling too hard, shaking hands with men they'd never acknowledge in daylight. Every table has a conversation that matters to somebody. Every corner has eyes. And in his usual spot, his corner table, his kingdom inside velvet and smoke, Bumpy Johnson sits like he's carved out of stone. Gray suit, hat nearby, drink in front of him. Untouched. Calm enough to make the whole room feel safer just by existing in it. Big Sam walks in like he always does. That's the thing. Nothing about his entrance screams danger. It's normal. Expected. He's the bodyguard. He's supposed to be close. He's supposed to move through the crowd with purpose. But tonight, there's something off in the way he carries himself. Like he's wearing a decision under his skin. He pauses near the bar. Not long, just long enough to swallow, to steady his breathing, to let the room blur into something he can survive. His hand goes into his jacket pocket. He feels the weight of the gun. And the weight of what the gun means? Across the room, Bumpy doesn't turn. He's mid-conversation, head slightly tilted, listening like a man who has all the time in the world. Sam starts walking. Slow at first, then steady. Through smoke, through laughter, through bodies that shift without realizing they're making room for history. Nobody stops him. Why would they? Big Sam is always near Bumpy. 6 feet away, then 4, then 2. Behind Bumpy's chair, Sam lifts the gun like it's part of the night, like it belongs there, like this is just another Friday in Harlem. At the bar, the bartender catches it first. A flash of metal. A hand that shouldn't be doing that. His eyes go wide. His mouth opens. But the warning never comes out, because Sam's already aiming. Right at the back of Bumpy Johnson's head, one breath, one squeeze, a moment so thin it feels like it might snap. Sam pulls the trigger. Click. No boom. No scream. Just that dry, hollow sound. A firing pin hitting nothing. And in that click, Harlem holds its breath. The room doesn't erupt right away. It freezes. The band stops mid-note like somebody cut the power. Conversations die in half sentences. 300 people turn their heads at the same time. Not toward Sam, toward Bumpy. Because Big Sam is the one holding the gun. But Bumpy Johnson is the one holding the room. And Bumpy doesn't move like a man who almost died. He moves like a man who expected the moment. He stays seated. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't reach for a weapon. He takes his time, like time belongs to him. He lifts his glass, slow, deliberate. A sip, a swallow. A calm so heavy it feels like pressure. That's psychological warfare. Not violence, control. Then Bumpy sets the glass down gently, like he's placing a chess piece, and he turns around in his chair. He looks up at Sam, just looks. No panic, no rage. Something colder than anger, disappointment. And in the silence, Bumpy speaks like he's talking to a man who already lost. I've been counting on you. It's not a shout, it's quiet, but it lands like a punch. Because the words don't sound surprising. They sound confirmed. Sam's eyes flicker. His grip loosens. The gun dips toward the floor like it suddenly weighs 1,000 pounds. he realizes what the room is realizing. This wasn't just an attempt, it was an exposure. Some versions of the story say Bumpy handled what came next with a gesture that cut deeper than a bullet. That he didn't punish Sam in front of everyone. He showed him what loyalty was supposed to look like. A sealed envelope, a paid debt, a mercy offered with a warning attached. Not because Bumpy was soft, because Bumpy was making a point. He wasn't just dealing with Sam. He was speaking to every witness in that room, to Harlem, to the people downtown who thought they could buy their way into his circle. Because now the betrayal isn't a rumor. It isn't something Sam can deny. It happened in front of everybody. The trap becomes a stage. And Bumpy Johnson stands there, calm, untouched, in full view, turning an assassination attempt into a message. You can set me up. You can send your money. You can even turn into my own people. But you can't do it quietly. Not in my house. By the time the sun comes up, the story isn't just in Harlem anymore. It's everywhere that matters. It moves through barbershops like gospel, through back rooms like smoke, through numbers, houses, pool halls, cab stands. It crosses borough lines the way fear does, fast, quiet, unstoppable. Because in the underworld, news travels on two things: money and shock. And nothing shocks men like this. A hit set up inside Harlem. An insider with a gun behind Bumpy Johnson's head. And Bumpy sitting there like he already knew the ending. That's why it became a legend. Not because a shot was fired. Because the attempt didn't create chaos. It created clarity. In downtown, the Italian families have to reevaluate. Historians who've studied these relationships point out a cold truth about how power works in that era. Bumpy wasn't just an enemy. He was also a stabilizer. A man who could keep Harlem organized, keep money flowing, keep violence from spilling into places that brought unwanted heat. A boss like that is valuable. And after a botched move like this, he becomes even more dangerous to challenge directly. Not because his gun is bigger than theirs, but because he sees patterns, because he reads people, because he turns your plan into his advantage. The families don't fear his gun. They fear his foresight. So the calculus shifts. If you can't remove him cleanly, and if trying only strengthens his legend, then sometimes the smartest move is the one nobody wants to admit. You back off. You let Harlem be Harlem. And you remember a lesson that spreads just as fast as the story did. When you try to trap a man who's already 3 moves ahead, all you really do is reveal where you're standing. Here's what we know and what lives in legend. The Lenox Lounge setup is a story that shows up again and again in memoir-style retellings and oral history. But the hard documentation is thin. That matters. Because it means you should hear it the same way Harlem heard it, as a warning, not a court transcript. What is documented is the pattern. Bumpy faced betrayals, close calls, pressure from outside power, and he survived by staying ahead. And that brings us back to that room and that clique. Bumpy Johnson proved something that night that most people miss. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's knowing. It's seeing the move before it's made. It's understanding that the real kill shot isn't always a bullet. Sometimes it's exposure. Sometimes it's turning a trap into a stage and making the whole room watch the traitor unmask himself. That's why they called him the professor. That's why he loved chess. Because in chess, the piece that wins the game isn't the loud one. It's the one that's already positioned where you can't see it coming. And in the Lenox Lounge, when the click echoed through the smoke, Bumpy didn't scramble. He finished his drink. The jazz started up again. Harlem exhaled. If you want more stories like this, hit like,